Dr. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the Inner Edison podcast. I really appreciate it.
Ed, it's really my pleasure. I'm really looking forward to this.
All right, just get this out. What's the best way for someone to find you in case they can't stay to the whole podcast if they want to find you?
So I have two primary entities online. So I am both a clinical psychologist and a professional speaker. So if the therapy part of what I do makes sense to you, our therapy practice is the neurodiversitycollective.com. And if you hear this and you're like, damn, this guy needs to come to my organization, that's drmattzakreski.com. I try to keep them separate, though there's obviously a little overlap. But sometimes we just help one person. Sometimes we help a whole bunch of people. And I mean, when you're in the helping profession, any help is good help.
All right. So you said you're a psychologist. Is that what I heard?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you practice like a normal psychologist with patients all?
I mean, yes. And so when I was in grad school, like they give us 5 years of clinical experience, right?
Right.
And I worked at a treatment facility before that, and I've worked after that. I've had basically every job in mental health. I've been a one-on-one aide. I've worked in a locked unit for kids with severe behavioral disorders. I've worked in a psychiatric facility. I've worked at a very prestigious prep school. I've worked at a pivot. I've worked in community mental health. So I really think every piece of everything I've taken shaped the practice that I have built for myself, right? And we've hired a few people, and a lot of times people will describe me as aggressively pragmatic, and to me, it's like it's just got to work.
Right.
So I take the things that work and I use them, and I leave the things that don't work because they don't serve me, and they certainly don't serve my clients.
Right.
So my work takes a little bit more of a global 360 view, because if you're working with a kid who's in a school that doesn't fit them, there's no amount of therapy that's going to make that school understand that kid. So our energy is better served at helping them either change how they educate this kid or find a different school. Right now, that's not any how to do therapy handbook. It's just, this is the thing that's going to be the biggest bang for the buck. So that's what we're trying to do, is change lives.
Right. All right. So you built this a business from
Yes.
this, right? That's what I'm trying. I was trying to put it all
Yeah.
together. I'm getting there. All right. I'm a little slow today. It's going to be 100 for us. It's high temperatures today, 104, which is dry heat though. So
Yeah.
it's not
Right.
humidity. Where you out of?
I'm in northern New Jersey, where it is exceptionally humid today.
So you're 80 and humid is horrible.
Horrible.
Us 80 is like, wow, this is a great day. But
Ooh, let me get a windbreaker.
you have by 6 o'clock it's 72. So with us in California, why we love California, we hate the politics, but we love the weather. Is typically it maxes out, depending where you are in California, about 5, in Southern California, it maxes out about 1 o'clock in the afternoon and starts getting cooler and cold. And we go down in the evening because of the Pacific Ocean breeze that breeze in and cools everything off. You guys even on the East Coast and the South and all that, you don't have that same thing. You got a hot ocean compared to what we're used to.
Yeah. And we depend on the sort of afternoon thunderstorm to break that humidity. And if you don't get it, or if it doesn't work, you're just adding wet socks on a wet blanket. It's just like just thick, right? And it's funny because I work with a lot of people who have pretty significant sensory needs, and humidity can trigger sensory needs. And it makes me feel like I'm an old-timey doctor in like Victorian England, like, you should go to the seashore to rest and recuperate, right? go holiday at Brighton. But sometimes changing where you're at has a major impact on your medical health, which thus has a big impact on your mental health.
Yeah, I was in South Carolina for my son. He was graduating. We were there, and it was like 90 and then it rained and you walked outside, you couldn't breathe. Yeah,
Oh.
I was like, this is, the humidity. I understood all that because I was in Texas for 3 months and swore I'd never go back.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like humidity. I don't care.
Right.
Everybody's like, but my skin is so soft and this. I know, but you're sweating all the time. You're in air conditioning and sweating. I don't understand that.
Yeah. It's now I went to college in North Carolina, so I gotta ask,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
was this like a Clemson, USC, or Citadel? Where were we at when you guys were in South Carolina?
We were at it was Army base.
Oh, okay. Right
Yeah.
on.
So he graduated. He's a medic airborne medic in the Army. So
That is very cool. And, I mean, what it's always so fascinating for me to talk to people who are military families, right? Because, there's a lot of military in my family. Uh, it was not my particular journey, but my son's godfather is a Marine JAG Corps. And, it's just one of those things, like, there are few things to me that are more inspiring than watching somebody who does something you can't do and do it well. And I just find that whole world so fascinating and inspiring.
Well, see, I also do another podcast called Helping the Brave, and I interview a bunch of people with their transitioning once we take the uniform off. And the PTSD that people have dealt with, I've figured about 80% of everybody has PTSD and they go into the military, have some major childhood trauma that they have to deal with that never dealt with. And they'll never deal with their PTSD until they deal with that.
Yeah.
And everybody's, well, I dealt with the stuff. No, you don't understand.
Yeah.
Sane people do not run towards danger.
Yeah.
You had to have something happen to you as a kid to make you be able to do that. That's not a normal thing. And so when you said there, certain people, there are, I'm not trying to say everybody, but there was a good percentage that's who goes in. And so you really have to look at that. And I was talking to somebody from the Veterans Administration, been there for 30 years and somebody else and all these different people. I'm like, have you guys ever thought about checking that out and helping people deal with that issues? Because I guarantee you those are the issues that these people have.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
since we talk about psychology.
Well, I mean, and one of the things we know about trauma is trauma begets trauma, right? If you're traumatized as a kid, you're more likely to be traumatized as a teen. You're more likely to be traumatized as a young adult. And like you might find an environment that gets to the action packed dopamine bombs that you're craving. I mean, if you're 19, 20 years old, I mean, getting trained how to use machine guns and mortars is a pretty big dopamine rush. I mean, from a neuropsychology perspective, you can draw the through line right there. I mean, my cousin who is a Marine, I mean, that's his story, right? And the Corps gave him the discipline and the structure that he needed. I mean, it forced him to grow up. Right? He came back and now he runs a small business and he's crushing it. But like, he's like, I look back at the guy I was, and it's like, man, okay, there's really something to this whole, armed forces military service thing. And, I mean, but he's always been that person who's charged towards trouble, sometimes when he shouldn't have, and sometimes when he should have. And now, and he got to do that professionally for many years.
Yeah, see, my son was a major. He had no regard for his human safety when there was a ball. That's what one of the coaches said. And same with snowboarding. He was huge into snowboard. I mean, he didn't go professional, but that's not what he wanted to do. But jumping out of planes, airborne medic, he loved it.
Right.
Until he hit a tree. And then he's like, you know what? I don't think I love it anymore.
Yeah. I mean, trees are pretty much undefeated in regardless of, cars, bicycles, one particular situation, a tree house that I built as a kid that did not stay in that tree and then just became a pile of boards on the ground. So yeah, trees, don't want to fight those. It's not.
Yeah. How did you get into doing what you do?
So I grew up as a neurodivergent kid. I was gifted, and in high school they diagnosed me with ADHD, which made a lot of sense. But I was so smart as a kid that no one noticed or cared that I was struggling with organization and time management, because school, like work, is about outcomes. So when you forget that there's a test, but study for it in the 5 minutes between class change, get a 91 on it, teacher's like, good job. And you're like, cool. And then you don't change your behavior because you don't have to. And when that bill finally came due for me, I was like, okay, if I ever get to be a psychologist, I want to work with kids like me, right? Because increasingly we're seeing that ADHD, autism, giftedness, dyslexia, they are not themselves mental illness. The mental illness comes from the way that those conditions rub friction against the world around us, right? You know, not being able to focus on your spreadsheet isn't a problem until your boss pulls you into the office and screams at you and you lose your job, right? And then you have depression, then you have anxiety, right? So we're framing these things in a different way so we can change the conversation about how do we give people tools to meet their different brains in a world that may or may not support that, and then give them the skills to navigate that on the back end.
Please don't take this wrong, but your website, when I look at it, is it set up a certain way for the right people? You know what I mean by that is, like, to me, it's like disorganized and not really, but it's just the colors and everything else, which,
Oh.
yeah, but I'm sure for you and other people like that, it was like, this is perfect. This is exactly where I should be at.
Like, you could see from my face, I was like, what do you mean? Like,
Yeah.
what? There's a website in the gifted community called hoagiesgifted.com, HOAGIES. And I mean, like, the woman who runs it is a dear friend. And if you look at it, I mean, it's her brain just
Right.
on webpage form. And it's a hot mess. I mean, it's a dog pile site. But if your brain works on that wavelength, it's like, oh yeah, the thing's right there. And I click to this thing to get to this thing. Like, and this actually, to your point, it's like the whole idea behind the neurodiversity movement is that differences aren't deficits. My website isn't worse than somebody else's website. It may not be for everybody as a result, right? So maybe we should have like a plain text version.
It's just, there's the colors and certain things, I'm sure, is, for most people, it's like, okay. And I looked at it, I was like, wow, what is this? Because it's unique. And so what is the definition of neurodiversity?
So there you can basically break all human brains down into two categories. Yeah. So you've got neurotypical brains, which are largely brains that act as you'd expect them to. There's some variation, but more or less, if you're 12 and your brain is acting like a 12-year-old brain, it's doing its job. Neurodivergent brains are brains that are different in some major way. And that can be both inborn, something like ADHD, giftedness, dyslexia. It can also be acquired. So if you served in Iraq and you were part of an IED and you had traumatic brain injury, you would have what we call an acquired neurodivergence, right? Your brain is different now. I've had 4 concussions from playing various sports, and you talked about snowboarding earlier. One of them was from snowboarding. Like I tell you, those trees, man, undefeated.
Wear a damn helmet. That's all I got.
Yeah, if I hadn't been wearing one, I don't think I would be chatting with you right now.
I was wearing them way before it was you had to. So
Yeah.
skiing wasn't a big deal for me without a helmet, but once I started snowboarding, I was like, okay, you're out of control. You got to wear a helmet.
The speed is just it's just so much more. And I can't ski to save my life, but because I grew up on the beach, I could snowboard. I could surf. So my friends said, you should try snowboarding because it's a similar body mechanic. stepped to snowboard and was like, and instantly it was like, oh yeah, this makes sense.
Yeah. So I was a skateboarder. So
yes, right. So,
but I liked skiing. I enjoyed skiing, but then everything's changed these days. It's totally different. I don't do it in any of that anymore. So
yeah. So neurodiversity is all the brains, right? So neurodiversity is the umbrella where there are neurotypical and neurodivergent people underneath. About 80% of people are neurotypical. So the world is built for them, and it's a lot of sort of just checking our language and our implicit biases. Not that I think anybody's out to get neurodivergent people, but it's just that if 4 out of 5 people think and speak and act one way, that other one person is by definition an outlier. So you're not going to build society around that one person, but it means there's going to be moments of friction, right? And when I'm at my when I do workshops, I do a simple exercise. I'll pick somebody from the audience, I'll ask them to stand up. So stand up, and I'm like, cool, now sit down. And they inevitably sit in a chair, and I'm like, great, why did you sit in a chair? They're like, well, you told me to sit down. Did I tell you to sit in the chair? And they're like, no, you told me to sit. Oh, right. Because the implication of my words is to sit down in your chair. But if you're the kind of person who has a more rigid or concrete brain, you're going to take my instruction and mean sit right on the damn ground. And then the teacher or boss would say, why are you doing sit on the ground there, chief? Don't do that. Like, well, you told me to sit down. They're like, no, I said sit in a chair. It's like, you didn't actually say that. And it's a great way, because you think about how many times in your life have people asked you to do things that on the surface seem very concrete, but there is room for misinterpretation because what you and I might take those terms to mean might be very different things.
Right. I could see that. Yeah. But also when you're talking about there's friction, but there's also those people who run companies that are amazing people running companies because they are like you.
Yeah.
They all have, if you didn't know that, I mean, that's, and some people call mental illness, but it's basically the way they think and everything else, they have to be different in order to do what they do.
Absolutely. I mean, one of my good friends from high school, who's a very neurotypical person, he essentially found a way to put a clock radio in things, and now it's an MP3 player, which is now on Bluetooth. But he made his money by finding a way to put clocks and music in things that you wouldn't expect clocks and music to be in, right? So he made a bunch of money that way, and now he's just sort of evolved with that. It's not a very outside the box idea, because you think about your microwave or your oven or your alarm clock, they have times on them and they can make sounds. Whereas one of my best friends from college, he's built his career on being a motivational speaker using hip hop and beats to connect with kids around the growth mindset. And he is the whitest kid in America, and he's from rural Kansas, right? That's a guy who is just outside the box. No, when like, what do you want to be when you grow up? When you're like 10, I want to be a motivational speaker using hip hop about the growth mindset. Nobody would have ever said that, right? So, the neurodivergent brain is not worse. It's also not better. It allows people to see certain things that other people might not see, but it also means we struggle with stuff that other people might not struggle with. So it's pros and cons. Yeah.
Right. What was the biggest challenge building your business with that?
Oh, boy. So I often say that if my job was just about seeing clients and giving talks, I would have the easiest job in the world. But it's the stuff that you must do to structure those things. You've got to have the paperwork filled out. You've got to pay the bills. You've got to have the domain name. You've got to make sure that you're paying your accountant and your attorney and all that other stuff. And I suck at that. Right.
A lot of business owners do. That has nothing to do. It goes back to do what you do best and have other people handle everything else.
And
And sometimes you can't do that in the beginning, but that's okay.
Yeah. No, I white knuckled it through the first couple years, and just this year we crossed the threshold I had set for myself that, yeah, if I start making this amount of money, I can hire an assistant, right? And my assistant's name is Julia, and she's fabulous. And just today, there was a thing that I was going to have to do that was going to be an utter time suck, not a great use of my time. And I'm like, I can give this to this person because this isn't in my skill set, right? And I think that, to your point, everybody does better when they are allowed to play to their strengths and their interests, right? That's every person on this planet, neurotypical or neurodivergent. But for neurodivergent people, the I don't wannas become I can'ts, right? Because my ADHD, I can't focus on some things unless I take my medication, right? My brain just doesn't let me do that. So it's the sort of thing, like, we take that framework and we apply it to everybody, and it's amazing how much better people do when you allow them to have some say in the activities they choose and how they spend their time and how they make their money. Because worst case scenario, they're just going to enjoy it a little bit more. Best case scenario, they're going to make a lot more money for a lot more people. So it's really a win-win.
Right. No, I just know most people, they're afraid to give things up. Yes, there's going to be problems. You can give it up. And there's things you do perfectly and have everything in place, and then something else comes in and destroys where your company's at, and you have to keep going. Overnight successes never happen in business.
Yeah. And it's the thing I try to remind myself of all the time is that to be good at something, you have to be willing to be bad at it. You have to be willing to be a beginner. And it's one of those things, like, to be a grown up and to have anything, we were beginners at a million things in our lives, but it was normalized when you're a kid to struggle to tie your shoes, or, you play baseball, you start hitting off a tee, like you swim with floaties on, whatever the thing might be, skiing, like you're skiing down the bunny slope or the green circles, right? But when you're an adult, you feel like you're not allowed to start as a beginner. You feel like you have to just, like, parachute in as a fully fledged human. Like, I can't tell you. We could do a whole other podcast on every mistake I made in the first couple of years of my business. Right?
That's what this podcast is.
Yeah, and
greatest accomplishments come from your greatest defeats. That's what the Inner Edison is. Yeah.
And I'm thankful for that, because I came into this whole thing with a fair amount of humility that, like, I'm good at the work. I didn't know if I was going to be good at the business part. And I've gotten a lot better at the business part. I had to have a super hard conversation with a family today about paying their bill. And it was very unpleasant, and a conversation I would have absolutely put off 2 years ago. I've been like, oh, maybe they'll just win the lottery. It's fine. Right. So, but when you push yourself through those first couple iterations of a thing where it sucks and you feel bad and you feel anxious and maybe it doesn't go very well, you take a breath, you look at it, how can I learn from this? And then you do it again and again and again and again, because that's the only pathway to the life you want.
And knowing who your perfect client is the most important thing. Know who you're supposed to talk to, that kind of stuff. See, in what happened with our industry is interest rates went up 5%. So it'd be like every one of your clients that was out there that you normally could identify as your client, you lost 65% of them because they all got hit well. Right. That's where we're at. So, and so everything changed drastically. And I knew that was going to happen when we were putting people in really low interest rates. I was like, existing home sales are going to drop from 85% to like 30 to 40. And unfortunately I was right.
Yeah. There are some times where it's great to be right. And there are some times where you're just like, damn it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that, we're in a point of time where it's very unique, and prices are so expensive. There's so much going on, and those things come and go, but it's just very unusual time. I've been doing this for over 27 years.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I've been doing it for a long time, since the 90s. And so I've never seen this happen in 6 months like we did. And unfortunately, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but it's just unfortunate where we are with everything that's going on. So that affects my business. What affects your business?
I mean, cost is always a factor, right? I mean, insurance companies don't reimburse very well for mental health treatment, if at all. I mean, I don't take insurance, and yes, it certainly helps my bottom line, but it's also more like when I did take insurance, I had a kid with severe crippling OCD, right? Obsessive compulsive disorder.
Mhm.
And this is a kid who had to do everything in nines. Like,
Wow.
you have to flip the light switch on and I'd
Mhm.
put his shoes on, right? And if he didn't do this, and he actually thought he was going to die. And the insurance company's like, we'll give you 9 sessions with this kid. I'm like, I can't even touch this in 9 sessions. They're like, oh, we'll give you 3 more. I'm like, oh, thank goodness. You know, so we negotiated a rate with the family, and it was like, listen, I need to see this kid for a long time because this is a very severe case, but you'll have me with you this whole time. It isn't going to be, 12 sessions, call it 3, maybe 4 months. You're going to have me for a year. And I might make a little bit less money up front, but I'm going to help this kid get better and make more money perhaps on the back end. So it's, I mean, that's the inherent problem with, I think, any human facing business, right? Is like you are trying to do right by your clients, right?
Mhm.
And you're trying to keep your lights on, right? Like sometimes I have to say to clients, it's like, listen, I'm not the right fit for you for lots of reasons. Even though there are times where it's like, man, I can make a quick couple grand off this family, but like that's just not how the ethics of it work, I think. I mean, it's, I'm sure you know people who traffic that way, as I know people in my field who do, but there's room for both, I think.
Yeah. It's a lot harder we get paid by the loan now. We don't get paid. So
Yeah.
years and years ago, it was by interest rates, and people could do that manipulating, it's however you could sell the person with the rate was 6.75, but they got them 6.875 or 6.99 to make more money. I was so happy when it went to just the loan amount.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah.
Because it doesn't matter. I tell them, it doesn't matter what rate I give you, I make the same amount of money. So I'm here to make it better for you. I always was, but this is just how this works now.
Yeah.
But yeah, same. I mean, I totally understand. I would have went to the kid and said, okay, we have 9 sessions. You do things in 9s. By the 9th session, you'll be cured. I'm just
kidding. You're really good. Yes, I am.
That's right. I set this up for 9 sessions to help you because you need to do 9. So we'll be by the 9th time, you're going to be totally taken care of.
Yeah,
Doesn't work that way.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't take work that way.
Yeah.
But what you do a lot of speaking, and what is your perfect speaking event for this, or do you just go to different companies and speak it? What do you normally do?
Well, that was the part of my job that happened very organically, right? And that, like, trying to retrofit structure around this thing that just sort of grew on its own. I mean, I was seeing these neurodivergent kids, gifted kids, ADHD kids, autistic kids, and as I did that, I was going to these meetings at schools, right? And they were like, "Wow, you're really good at this. Can you like stick around and like tell us what you know?" And I did that for a while, and then I realized I could charge them for that, so I started doing that. And then I went to conferences, and then I was like, "Wait, I'm better at what I do than what they're doing, and they're getting paid to do this." So I started putting my hat in those rings, and now, like, I'll do keynotes and trainings, from like state organizations to interest groups. There's a lot of people out there, specifically schools, that are serving these people who are operating with one hand tied behind their back because they don't know enough, right? It's not their fault. It's just they need to know more. And then the adults at those schools would say to me, Matt, like, yeah, I'm a teacher and you're really helping me with this ADHD kid. My husband works for this IT company. there's a lot of these people at this IT company. Could you talk to them? And I'm like, give me their phone number, right? So I go over and I talk to them, and the IT company I'm thinking of, they were like, hold on, wait. So there's a reason we're like this? I'm like, yeah, your brains are different. I will explain all this to you. And this one guy came up to me, and afterwards he's like, I learned more from you in this 90 minutes than I think I learned in all graduate school. I'm like, oh, what do you have your degree? And he's like, I have a doctorate in computer science. He nodded at me and then he wandered away. I was like, okay, like that's my people right there. Like,
Right.
very smart, not a whole lot of social skills.
Yeah.
um, and I love it, right? But so every just like every teacher teaches neurodivergent kids, whether they know it or not. Every company has neurodivergent employees, whether they know it or not. Sometimes, they're in the C-suite. It's the CEO or the CFO, and they're like, "Yes, my brain is different. That's how this company started in the first place." But a lot of times, it's your sales team or it's your infrastructure support staff, and you wonder why they're struggling. A lot of it is like if we made a few simple tweaks to what business is for them, then they're not spending so much time doing something that they hate and are bad at and is triggering for them. They're spending more time doing the things that make them feel good and play to their strengths, right? So it's just that. I mean, it's working smart, not hard.
Well, and that should be the way it is for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, the best practices in neurodivergence are just the best practices.
Right,
I
in
mean,
general.
that's the best part of my job is I'm like this. I'm speaking to the neurodivergent people, but the strategies we're talking about work for every single person in this room. Which we talk about neurodiversity. All people benefit from better practices, right? If neurodivergence is what gets me in the room, what cracks open the door, then damn, then cool, then everybody benefits from me being around. Just like everybody benefits from you and I talking on this podcast, right? You don't have to be any kind of brain to listen to this. You're going to hear it, and then you can take that message and give it to however many people in your life would benefit from it.
And also know the difference in the people in your life, why they're different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so like empowering to know that stuff, right? Like,
knowing how to talk to people in the first place and how to communicate with them is the most important thing. I try to do things and to the least amount of energy and the fastest we can get things done. So we have to talk about it one time. And sometimes that doesn't work for people. And I get that, but how do we figure that out? But I would assume you're an introvert.
most neurodivergent people are. I'm actually very extroverted.
But an introvert is somebody like when they go speak and then they come back home and they recuperate at home. It's about the energy they try to get. It's not that. So a lot of people that I know think it's where we don't want to go do something. That's not the
Right.
case. It's just
Yeah,
we
no.
want to, after we do it, we want to be left alone.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Did I
Well,
get that right? Is that really the true definition?
that's
Yeah.
exactly I'm married to an introvert. And if we have people over in the pool or we go to a family party, we'll get in the car. My wife will be like, I need to be quiet for like 45 minutes. I'm like, because we've been married 10 years now. And like I'm used to those rhythms. Whereas like I'm the sort of person who's like, I'll go to the opening of a drawer, right? You want to, the older I get, the more I realize that like there's an upper limit to that energy. Like sooner or later, even I crash, right? And whereas maybe 10, 15 years ago, it was just up and 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 up, right? But I gave, I was just out in Colorado doing a series of talks, and my Wednesday was wake up, breakfast, hour talk, lunch, hour talk, 15-minute break, hour talk, dinner, 2-hour event at night. And I like floated back to my hotel room. I was like, that was awesome. That was so awesome. But I was like, I know I'm going to have to take care of myself because like at some point that energy is just going to drop out. Because I've basically been jamming my foot on the gas all day, right? And sooner or later the tank runs out of fuel. So, so I just went out and I got myself I went out, found an ice cream place, had myself an ice cream and just sat there. And then when I felt the wave come over, I was like, that's much better now. Right. The other interesting thing about introverts versus extroverts is introverts are consequence averse, whereas extroverts are reward driven, right? So if I was like, Ed, your buddy is visiting nearby, but there's a bad storm. Do you want to go visit your buddy? And, you got to make a 45-minute drive through a bad storm. Now the introvert goes, oh, something bad might happen. The extrovert goes, I can see my buddy. And I cannot tell you how many times my wife and I have had that conversation. I'm like, if we did it, this thing might go well. She's like, if you do it, these things might go terribly. We're both right. But we just, it's finding what's the best move for you in that moment.
Right. But back to the whole speaking, I do multiple podcasts a day. When I get to about 6, 7, I'm afterwards exhausted. Just, yeah. And but I enjoy it all the way through. Every one of them. I enjoy talking to people, finding out why they do things a certain way. What used to get me in trouble at dinner parties, my wife would grab my thigh to tell me to shut up, is exactly what I could do all day long on these things.
Yeah. Well, the thing I like about your style is that you are very authentic, right? You follow those threads and you ask those questions. I'm lucky enough to be on a lot of podcasts, and sometimes I'm like, man, you're not my PR agent. You're not here to be tell me another great thing about yourself and not challenge me or push back at all. I'm like, listen, I better bring my game if I'm talking to you, because you're going to ask those insightful questions. But I think that's what people want to know.
Mm-hmm. And that's how it should be. I mean, I did in the first year I was doing it, I had a guy I asked him and he goes, oh my God, you were listening to what I was saying. I was like, that's what I'm supposed to do as the host. I ask a question, you answer, you talk, and then I come back. I remember what you say. I go back to it to bring it back to talk about it, because I don't want to interrupt you while you're talking in your flow. But I also picked that up from being on radio for many, many years. I got on radio in 2018, and it's iHeart radio station, Power Talk. It was a real estate and finance show. I still do it, but I learned how to talk from doing the radio, and asking questions, and having the producer in my ear didn't hurt.
No, I'm sure. And some of that is about owning your limitations and the realities of running any business, right? Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have a producer, right? It's my attorney's you can't do this particular thing because there are rules. And I'm like, fine. I don't always like the rules, but I accept that they exist. And, but there is and if we zoom out for a second, right? You're taking your interests in finance and just human people and building what, by all accounts, from what I've been able to Google, is a multimedia empire around talking to people about the things that interest you. So isn't that proof that you find the things that you are most fired up about, you can organize your life around them and find a way to make a good living at it, right? There's no reason that you need to be running a car wash in Flagstaff or managing an Arby's in Boise, right? You can do the things that set your brain on fire, just like I do the things that set my brain on fire.
Right. It does take a while, though.
You got to be able to stick with that the grind part of it, which is not easy.
Thousands and thousands of hours of talking. Because I had a friend of mine the other day goes, man, you're so natural at it. You missed your calling. I'm like, no, I didn't miss my calling. Right. He thinks I should be on TV. Why would I want to be on TV? That's going to be gone before you. I mean, TV's going to be there and stuff's going to be on it, but everything's changing. It's all streamed. It's all other stuff. It's not, everybody's going to podcasting. Everybody's doing other stuff. And what people understand, if you want to start a podcast, do it, because 80% of them fail or have failed. So even though there's so many of them, because I did a 10-23 rule of podcasting, 80% of them fell by the 10th episode. Wow. And then the next one is the 23rd episode. And then if you get past that, you've made it. But even then, people can, and don't ever, if you ever start a podcast, don't ever take any time off from it. Just put a bunch of stuff in the can and have it drop. Because the moment you stop it for a period of time, people will forget about you.
Right.
Because
I mean, yeah.
unless you're Joe Rogan, but everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically him, and like, I mean, Dreaming Green's podcast seems to be doing pretty well.
I like Huberman's.
I don't know if that's on my list. I should add it.
Dr. Human, he's the one he's from Stanford. He talks about everything to do with exercise, the brain, the gut. He's really good. So, yeah,
that's super cool.
Yeah, I found him because I was getting into cold plunges and I was searching everything about cold plunge and I wanted to know everything about it. And I came across this podcast. My wife's like, listen to this, because she was already listen to him. But yeah.
I'm a much better podcast guest than I am a podcast host, though. We are probably pivoting into starting our own pretty soon. We're building the infrastructure around it, because once again, it's like, if you tell me at Tuesdays at 10 o'clock, there's going to be somebody in my Riverside room and they'll be there for me to interview and I can ask them questions and then someone will edit it and then it will magically appear on the internet, 2 big thumbs up from me. Right. But I'm not going to be good at those parts. So Jake, who's on my team, Jake's like, oh, I will do all of those parts. Yeah, all you need to do is do the talk. And I'm pretty good at that. So.
And if you have any questions on that, reach out to me, because I've done it so much and too much where everybody's like, are you going to put a podcast course together? I'm like, why? But I keep getting hit for the little stuff, So.
Yeah.
So it's in the works. Yeah. But just remember 2 things when you start it: Cast Magic and Opus Clips.
Cast Magic and Opus Clips. That was the other one?
Cast Magic. So my affiliate link is getcastmagic or trycastmagic.com. Mm-hmm. And basically you drop your video in there. This is for your other guy, and it will transcribe it. It will come up with the titles. It will come up everything you ever thought of, keywords, everything you need, meta. It creates it. Anything that it doesn't, like I used to do a lot of lives and I'd pre-record them and then have them go live. But to explain that whole thing, I had to do like a pre-show, like it didn't happen. Well, I told Cast Magic, make a pre-show, and now it makes a pre-show also every time, just in case I needed it.
So, oh wow, jeez.
And then Opus Clips is you drop your video on there and it cuts it up into shorts.
Yeah.
And then you can put B-roll, and I mean the stuff that it can do is just shocking. It can so much that I had a full team handling my stuff, and I took it back over because of what happened to our industry. And that's to a point where I'm like, okay, I have this down to where now I know exactly what needs to happen. I am working on getting a VA to take over everything I do. But now I know it's not 10 hours. It's not this. There's no reason they can't do what I want done with all these new AI tools.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So there's just so much out there now. It just changes everything. So
love it.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Matt, thank you so much for coming on the Inner Edison podcast. Again, how do people find you?
So, yeah, I mean, if for the speaking, it's drmattzakreski.com. I apologize in advance for the color.
There's nothing wrong with the color. It's definitely set up for people who, for me, I can read it, but it's not set up for me. It's set up for somebody like you.
Right. And then the Neurodiversity Collective, which is our therapy practice. I mean, one of the cool rules that came out from the COVID times is that if you are a licensed therapist in a state that accepts something called Psi Pact, you can see somebody from any state as long as they opt into this program. So I see people from literally all over the country, from Washington to Delaware from Vermont to Florida. So it isn't just New Jersey anymore, right? It's where, because there's just so much need out there. So we've enabled mental health professionals to sort of cross those state lines as long as you have a Wi-Fi connection.
Wow. I wish they made it so easy for us to go across state lines, but we have to get all these little licenses and everything else in every state. Yeah.
That was psychology until 2020, right? And then 3 weeks of COVID and the powers that be were like, oh damn, okay, we need to fix this right now. So I hopefully, the the people who regulate you guys will see the light as well.
No, they
Gonna,
won't. No, unfortunately, and we do the same thing, so it shouldn't matter what state we're in.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's silly to me. Like, therapy is therapy, whether you're in Mississippi or Missouri. But
Well, it's like a loan's a loan, no matter where you are. And certain states, like Texas, has unique situations, which I used to do stuff in Texas and other places, so it's not a big deal. But each individual has to be licensed, plus the company has to be licensed in every state that you want to do business in. It's got to be an easier way to do it someday, maybe. Yeah.
Someday, right? Here's hoping.
Yeah.
Again,
thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure.